It's odd that one scarcely gets anything worth having by post, yet one always wants one's letters, said Mr. Banks. What damned rot they talk, thought Charles Tansley, laying down his spoon precisely in the middle of his plate, which he had swept clean, as if Lily thought he sat opposite to her with his back to the window, precisely in the middle of view. He were determined to make sure of his meals. Everything about him had that meager fixity, that bare unloveliness. But nevertheless, the fact remained it was almost impossible to dislike anyone if one looked at them. She liked his eyes. They were blue, deep-set, frightening. "Do you write many letters, Mr. Tansley?" asked Mrs. Ramsay, pitying him too, Lily supposed, for that was true of Mrs. Ramsay. She pitied men always as if they lacked something, women never, as if they had something. "He wrote to his mother, otherwise he did not suppose he wrote one letter a month," said Mr. Tansley shortly. For he was not going to talk the sort of rot these people wanted him to talk. He was not going to be condescended to by these silly women. He had been reading in his room, and now he came down, and it all seemed him silly, superficial, flimsy. Why did they dress? He had come down in his ordinary clothes. He had not got any dress clothes. One never gets anything worth having by post. That was the sort of thing they were always saying. They made men say that sort of thing. Yes, it was pretty well true, he thought. They never got anything worth having from one's year's end to another. They did nothing but talk, 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 eat, eat, eat. It was the women's fault. Women made civilization impossible with all their charm, all their silliness. "No going to the Lighthouse tomorrow, Mrs. Ramsay," he said, asserting himself. He liked her. He admired her. He still thought of the man in the drain pipe looking up at her. But he felt it necessary to assert himself. He was really, Lily Briscoe thought, in spite of his eyes, but then look at his nose, look at his hands, the most uncharming human being she had ever met. Then why did she mind what he said? Women can't write, women can't paint. What did that matter coming from him? Since clearly it was not true to him, but for some reason helpful to him, and that was why he said it? Why did her whole being bow like corn under a wind and erect itself again from this abasement only with a great and rather painful effort? She must make it once more. There's the sprig on the tablecloth. There's my painting. I must move the tree to the middle. That matters. Nothing else. Could she not hold fast to that, she asked herself, and not lose her temper and not argue, and if she wanted revenge, take it by laughing at him? "Oh, Mr. Tansley," she said, "do take me to the Lighthouse with you. I should so love it." She was telling lies, he could see. She was saying what she did not mean to annoy him for some reason. She was laughing at him. He was in his old flannel trousers. He had no others. He felt very rough and isolated and lonely. He knew that she was trying to tease him for some reason. She didn't want to go to the Lighthouse with him. She despised him. So did Prue Ramsay. So did they all. But was he not going to be made a fool of by women? So he turned deliberately in his chair and looked out of the window and said, all in a jerk, very rudely, it would be too rough for her tomorrow. She would be sick. It annoyed him that she should have made him speak like that with Mrs. Ramsay listening. If only he could be alone in his room working, he thought, among his books. That was where he felt at his ease. And he had never run a penny into debt. He had never cost his father a penny since he was 15. He had helped them at home out of his savings. He was educating his sister. Still, he wished he had known how to answer Miss Briscoe properly. He wished it had not come out all in a jerk like that. You'd be sick. He wished he could think of something to say to Mrs. Ramsay, something which would show her that he was not just a dry prig. That was what they all thought of him. He turned to her, but Mrs. Ramsay was talking about people he had never heard of to William Banks. "Yes, take it away," she said briefly, interrupting what she was saying to Mr. Banks to speak to the maid. "It must have been 20 years ago that I last saw her," she was saying, turning back to him again as if she could not lose a moment of their talk. For she was absorbed by what they were saying. So he had actually heard from her this evening, and was Carrie still living at Marlow, and was everything still the same? Oh, she could remember, as if it were yesterday, going on the river, feeling very cold. But if the Mannings made a plan, they stuck to it. Never should she forget Herbert killing a wasp with a teaspoon on the bank. And it was still going on, Mrs. Ramsay mused, gliding like a ghost among the chairs and tables of that drawing room on the banks of the Thames where she had been so very, very cold 20 years ago. But now she went among them like a ghost, and it fascinated her as if, while she had changed, that particular day, now become very still and beautiful, had remained there all these years. Had Carrie written to him herself, she asked. Yes, she says they're building a new billiard room, he said. No, that was out of the question, building a billiard room. It seemed her impossible. Mr. Banks could not see that there was anything very odd about it. They were very well off now. Should he give her love to Carrie? Oh, said Mrs. Ramsay with a little start. No, she added, reflecting that she did not know this Carrie who built a new billiard room. But how strange, she repeated to Mr. Banks' amusement, that they should be going on there still. For it was extraordinary to think that they had been capable of going on living all these years when she had not thought of them more than once all that time. How eventful her own life had been during those same years. Yet perhaps Carrie Manning had not thought about her either. The thought was strange and distasteful. People soon drift apart, said Mr. Banks, feeling, however, some satisfaction when he thought that, after all, he knew both the Mannings and the Ramsays. He had not drifted apart, he thought, laying down his spoon and wiping his clean-shaven lips punctiliously. But perhaps he was rather unusual, he thought. In this, he never let himself get into a groove. He had friends in all circles. Mrs. Ramsay had to break off here to tell the maid something about keeping food hot. That was why he preferred dining alone. All those interruptions annoyed him. Well, thought William Banks, preserving a demeanor of exquisite courtesy and merely spreading the fingers of his left hand on the tablecloth as a mechanic examines a tool beautifully polished and ready for use in an interval of leisure. Such are the sacrifices one's friends ask of one. It would have hurt her if he had refused to come, but it was not worth it for him. Looking at his hand, he thought that if he had been alone, dinner would have been almost over now. He would have been free to work. Yes, he thought, it is a terrible waste of time. The children were dropping in still. I wish one of you would run up to Roger's room, Mrs. Ramsay was saying. How trifling it all is, how boring it all is, he thought, compared with the other thing, work. Here he sat, drumming his fingers on the tablecloth when he might have been. He took a flashing bird's eye view of his work. What a waste of time it all was, to be sure. Yet, he thought, she is one of my closest friends, one of my oldest friends. I am by way of being devoted to her. Yet now, at this moment, her presence meant absolutely nothing to him. Her beauty meant nothing to him. Her sitting with her little boy at the window, nothing. He wished only to be alone and to take up that book. He felt uncomfortable, he felt treacherous that he should sit by her side and feel nothing for her. The truth was that he did not enjoy family life. It was in this sort of state that one asked oneself, what does one live for? Why, one asked oneself, does one take all these pains for the human race to go on? Is it so very desirable? Are we attractive as a species? Not so very, he thought, looking at those rather untidy boys. His favorite Cam was in bed, he supposed. Foolish questions, vain questions, questions one never asked if one was occupied. Is human life this? Is human life that? One never had time to think about it. But here he was asking himself that sort of question because Mrs. Ramsay was giving orders to servants, and also because it had struck him, thinking how surprised Mrs. Ramsay was, that Carrie Manning should still exist, that friendships, even the best of them, are frail things.